Hi, everyone. I am so excited to be here and to talk about the importance of pairing. So I am Sama. This is my GitHub and my Twitter. If you want to follow me, feel free. You don't have to. Up to you. And a brief roadmap. We'll start by talking about natural languages and learning methods, and then do a deep dive into pairing and discuss some of its benefits, drawbacks, and ways we can use it as a learning tool. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm a front-end developer at Heroku, and we use Ember, as Chad has already mentioned, and I also work with Jamie White. And so I started at Heroku a little over a year ago. And when I started, I didn't really have any past knowledge or experience with Ember. So this last year has really been a deep dive into the world of Ember for me. And it's been a great experience. Except I've noticed a problem, and this problem hasn't been Ember specific, but it's actually extended to the world of programming languages in general. Now, this problem is that there isn't a very clear-cut way to learn a programming language or framework. There's the very formal approach, which is mainly boot camps and classes. And then there's the self-taught approach, involving online tutorials, reading docs and guides, coding projects. And I've seen many people use this approach very successfully. Except still, teaching yourself is incredibly intimidating. It requires a lot of independence and a lot of comfort with a lack of structure. And the two methods that exist that we can really rely on are reading docs and guides and coding projects. So I see this as a really big barrier to learning a programming language. We don't have a lot of options available to us in different ways we can learn, which means it's not very friendly or welcoming. So over the course of this last year, I've noticed something else as well. I've been learning Spanish since high school, and as I learned Ember, I began to see parallels in how I had learned Spanish and how I was learning Ember, which was really interesting to me because learning natural languages is very clear and accessible. There are so many methods, strategies, and tools that we can use. If you Google how to learn French, you're going to get page upon page of hits, all with really great methods that you can use. So how can we take this existing structure of great resources and use it to improve the process of learning programming languages, especially if we can see parallels between the two? So I thought back again to this last year, and I began to apply some common natural language learning methods to my experiences to really scope out what the similarities and differences are. For today, I picked my 5 favorite methods that people use to learn natural languages and noted the parallels with my Ember experiences. So the first method I considered is studying the language every day. Duolingo and Babbel are language learning apps where you're heavily encouraged to spend a bit of time every day on them learning a language. I've used Duolingo to learn words and phrases in a variety of languages, as well as to keep up with my vocab and grammar in Spanish. Now with Ember, I was naturally doing this as part of my onboarding process. I would read the guides, I'd write some code, I'd work on projects. But even now, as I pick up new programming languages and frameworks, I try to spend at least 15 minutes a day, every day, reviewing key concepts and writing some code. Now, this method is so effective because it helps you to build a strong foundation. Language classes in college, the really intensive ones, are 5 days a week for a reason. It helps keep your memory fresh and helps you stick to the habit. On the other hand, binge studying is going to make you give up because you're constantly playing catch-up. And then studying the language every day falls into this idea of spaced repetition. You're more likely to properly memorize something if you repeatedly learn it over sections of time. So the second method I thought about is self-talk. I would literally talk to myself in my head or out loud in Spanish, have many conversations about how my day was going, what I was doing in that moment, and I found that my dog is also a great conversation partner. With Ember, I see this more as explaining concepts to myself or building them out. So when I was really struggling with the concept of a service, my manager recommended that I write one, even if it was never actually used, just so I would fully understand the concept. And so self-talk is a great method. It's challenging and will help you gain familiarity with the language. but it's also less intense than talking to someone else. Your conversation partner is just yourself, your pet, maybe a lamp, whatever you choose, and it's a lot less intense. Now, the third method I thought about is visiting a country. So I studied abroad in Spain, and I work in a code base written in Ember. And so for today, I see the parallel as country and code base. Now, when you are in this country or code base, you're surrounded by that language, whether it be Spanish or Ember, and so you will gain familiarity with it. You're seeing real-life examples of things that you've only seen in books and documentation, and much more complicated examples as well, which is great for your learning process because real life is complicated. Unfortunately, it's not as straightforward as docs and books would make it seem. The fourth method is carrying a dictionary. You have Google Translate, you have various language dictionaries. In Ember, you have the Ember Guides, you have Stack Overflow. And so a dictionary is a quick reference to confirm your syntax and to make sure that you're learning correctly. It will help you push past obstacles, because when you get really stuck and you can't remember what's supposed to come next, you have an easy solution to quickly make it past this obstacle and continue instead of just giving up. Now, the fifth and final method is connecting with a native speaker. So I do coffee chats in Spanish with a coworker, and I did a very similar thing back in college with my friends who were more advanced at Spanish than I was, or with my cousins who are fluent. With Ember, I really see this as pairing. I did a lot of pairing in the beginning of my Ember learning journey, and I still do to this day. I work a lot with the experts and the senior engineers on my team, and we'd work on things like bugs and small tasks together. And I found this incredibly helpful in my learning process because I learned to intuitively express my thoughts in the language, and it became far more natural for me to use it. Working with experts or with native speakers was amazing. I saw what they did well, and I learned from how they wielded the language. It was a great way to challenge myself, and I even picked up a bit of slang, or in Ember's case, tooling, which moved me from this more formal academic knowledge to a much more relaxed, natural one. So these 5 methods, what do they have in common? What are the overarching themes that make them such effective learning tools? Well, the first thing is exposure. The more that you use the language, the more your brain is going to consider it useful and something worth caring about. So you're going to learn so well that you can't forget it. The second big thing is immersion. You're using the language in everyday life, and you'll gain familiarity with it. You also learn to produce something in this language, and you learn from your mistakes as well. So now, considering how we learn natural languages has given us a few methods that we can apply to programming languages. But for today, let's leave natural languages behind and focus on pairing, as I have found it to be the most beneficial learning method out of these 5 over the last year. So what makes pairing such a powerful learning tool? Well, pairing has several learning benefits, the first of which is the knowledge transfer, the holy grail, if you will. When you pair, you are exploring and digging deeper together, which is going to cement your knowledge. You're getting an explanation of why things work from an expert, which will help you to understand the system better. And if you're working on an existing code base, will help you to understand the past decisions that have been made. And of course, this is how you're filling in the gaps and holes in your knowledge. You also gain new perspectives and new ways to think. People come to the table with different frames of views and different thought processes. When you pair, you are stepping inside the other person's head as they think through a problem. Of course, sometimes things aren't going to resonate, and that's okay, because you're just figuring out what doesn't work for you. And when things do resonate, you can adopt those patterns into your own thought processes and workflows. And then, if you're a junior engineer, this is incredibly helpful, because you're learning ways to reason through these new types of problems that you're seeing. And then pairing will also give you tips and tricks, these unspoken skills to help you work more efficiently. When I pair with my senior engineers, I learn about VS Code plugins, Vim tricks, better workflows, Git commands. And these aren't really part of formal learning or onboarding processes. A lot of this is passed down knowledge. It's these small shortcuts that will make you more of an expert at the end of the day because you will be more productive and more efficient. And so when I talked to my coworkers about the benefits of pairing, those 3 ideas popped up time and time again. But I wanted to dig a little deeper into why pairing is such an effective learning method. So I decided to look at it from a psychological standpoint. Now, it turns out that pairing is what's known as a desirable difficulty. So in psychology, desirable difficulties are these obstacles that make learning more challenging, slower, and more frustrating in the short term, but far better in the long term. There's an idea of the generation effect, where your struggle to generate an answer, even if that answer is wrong, is going to enhance your subsequent learning. So the Socratic method is a really great example of this, where the teacher is pressing and questioning the student for an answer, and the student, in their struggle to come up with anything, is going to begin to really understand the material. Desirable difficulties are all about intentionally sacrificing current performance for future benefit. And so when I talk to my coworkers, a lot of them mention this trade-off between progress and knowledge that you have to make when you pair. You are giving up a bit of progress, but you gain a lot of knowledge in return. Desirable difficulties are all about essentially testing your knowledge. You're struggling to retrieve information, which is going to prime your brain for further learning, even if that retrieval is unsuccessful. And so retrieval, specifically, is pulling something out of your long-term memory and bringing it into your working memory or your awareness. This is an active reconstruction process of the memory, meaning that the memory is going to become more recallable in the future, and it's also strengthening the likelihood that you will recall this memory accurately in the future. And then finally, desirable difficulties are characterized by struggle, because this challenge and struggle is so important for future growth. So that's pairing from more of a psychological standpoint. But I also wanted to consider it from the various language learning theories. And it turns out pairing fits a few of these as well. So there's this idea of comprehensible input, where what you're taking in, whether you're hearing it or reading it, is generally understood, even if the details aren't all there. But this is really great, because this is when you progress. You progress when the input is slightly more advanced than where you are at. You get the big picture, but you may not get the details or the specifics. And this is how you learn those details and specifics. And on the flip side of input is output. You need to use the language too. This is how you notice your gaps in your own knowledge. And this is how you validate if you're correct, through your native speaker or your expert. And speaking of validation brings us to feedback and review. When you pair, when you learn a language, you're getting constructive criticism. You can fix your mistakes and learn from them. And this is also your opportunity to be reinforced in your correct language patterns. So, if you are learning a language, if you're a junior engineer, pairing is going to be incredibly helpful for you. But what about senior engineers? Why should you be giving up your time to help teach someone else for these pairing sessions? Well, it turns out senior engineers are going to benefit in a lot of the same ways as junior engineers, because pairing is still very much a test of their knowledge. They have to explain concepts in a way that a junior engineer will understand, which will test how well they actually know the material and see how well they understand the intricacies of each concept. They also pick up new perspectives. They are seeing how a beginner's mind thinks when they talk to a junior engineer, and they can pick up some of these thought patterns and break their old established habits. They also gain soft skills. They learn how to empathize, how to be patient, how to teach, and in teaching, how to nudge people in the right direction instead of just telling them what to do. And of course, senior engineers get to really be mentors here and bring up the people around them. So, junior and senior engineers are going to benefit from pairing. But what about the business? Why should a business make this trade-off between progress and knowledge? What's in it for them? So I have a couple coworkers who've worked at companies where pairing is very much an integral part of the engineering structure. And I asked them the same exact question. So it turns out that number one, there are business benefits to pairing. And Second of all, they told me to think about a solo versus a pair of engineers. Now let's say these two come across a bug, these two cases. If you're a solo engineer, you're going to come across this bug, waffle over it, maybe step away, take some time to think about it, eventually come up with a solution. If you're a pair of engineers, you're going to have a quick conversation and then continue. Because you come to the table with different backgrounds, different knowledge bases, different contexts, and so you can bounce ideas off one another and arrive at a solution much faster. Meaning, your output is going to be a lot higher, to the point where the difference is almost dramatic. Furthermore, when you're pairing, you are accountable to another person, so you stay more focused and more alert as you work through problems. You will also produce better code. You are accountable to not only each other, but to the quality of the product that you are producing. So you're going to remind one another to not forget things, to not skip things. And you will end up with more well-rounded, comprehensive, complete code. And then finally, if you are a business, investing in pairing is investing in talent. And so you will begin to develop these really talented engineers, which improves your brand because now you can attract even more talent. It also increases employee retention and improves morale. Engineers are going to feel more engaged as they learn and teach from one another. There are a couple other benefits to pairing too that I quickly want to touch upon. These mainly center around community. Pairing boosts morale and promotes bonding. You're spending a lot of time with your pair. You can find mentors and experts to help you in your learning process through pairing, and maybe even in your career growth. And then, of course, you're building a community around the language or the framework, which is going to build excitement and enthusiasm. A lot of my excitement for Ember comes from my pairing sessions with senior engineers who really sung Ember's praises and talked very highly about a lot of its key features and concepts. And that enthusiasm was contagious, and I picked up on a lot of it. Now, unfortunately, pairing is not perfect because no learning method is, and there are definitely drawbacks. So one of these drawbacks is that pairing is mentally exhausting. You need to stay alert and focused. It takes a lot of energy. And the best way to combat this that I found is just to take breaks. So using a Pomodoro timer is really effective here, where you're very heads down pairing for 25 minutes, and then you take 5 minutes to step away, do whatever you need to do so you can come back for your next 25-minute session feeling refreshed, rejuvenated, and ready to pair again. Distractions are super tough when pairing, especially when remote pairing. So the obvious answer here is to just remove as many as possible. But of course, some are inevitable. And in that case, communication is key. Just let the other person know that you're doing something else and that they will have your full attention momentarily. Pairing takes up a lot of time. If you have an issue with a deadline, this may not be your best opportunity to knowledge transfer pair. You're going to have to sacrifice knowledge for progress here. Of course, you can come back together after the deadline and talk through everything to make sure that you both really understand what you fixed, what you built, what you created. And then I've heard people say that pairing is not great for simple or busy work, that you really must pick the appropriate situation in which to pair. To which I agree, but I think if you can, this is a really great opportunity for a bonding moment. If your work feels like a chore, why not work with someone who's going to keep you engaged and alert and focused on it, and it will feel less like a chore as a result. So while yes, pairing definitely has drawbacks, I hope we've seen a couple ways that we can combat these drawbacks. And as one of my coworkers put it, none of these are good enough reasons to not pair. So now, what can you do? How can we take this information that we've just learned about the benefits and drawbacks and use it to start our own pairing practices or improve our current pairing sessions? So if you are a beginner or a junior engineer, it really helps to walk into a pairing session with some sort of foundation, reading the documentation at a minimum, maybe also working on a project. Because once you understand the basics, pairing is great for understanding the intricacies, and you can really draw on the knowledge and expertise of your senior engineer. Ask a lot of questions, even the silly or dumb ones. because this is how you gain knowledge and fill in the gaps in your understanding. If you are an expert or a senior engineer who is doing a pairing session, make sure that you're creating a safe space, a comfortable learning environment where your junior engineer feels okay to ask these kinds of questions and to really challenge themselves. Empathy and patience are really key. Understand where the junior engineer is at and try to meet them at their level. And then guiding versus telling. You want to nudge them in the right direction instead of just telling them what to do, since that's not a very helpful learning process. Questions are a really great way of doing this, as we've seen from the Socratic method. Asking, how do you think we can solve this, will really begin to nudge them in the right direction and start those thought processes. And then a bit of advice. So the question, do you know, is very vague. The answer you're going to get is yes or no. On the other hand, what do you know about blank is a much better question and opens the floor for a much more nuanced answer. So you can better tailor your explanation to their experience. And then, of course, at the end of every pairing session, it's always a good idea to go back through everything to make sure it has been fully explained and there are no more lingering questions. And then in general, for everyone, time is really key to maximizing a pairing session. You want to allocate more time than you think, because you don't want to minimize those knowledge gains in order to maximize progress. Once again, distractions are hard when pairing. You want to remove as many as possible so you can stay really focused on the task at hand. Ask for feedback. What went well? What could you improve on for next time? In this way, you and your partner can better match your pairing styles to one another and improve the quality of every subsequent pairing session. And then, of course, excitement. You have to really want to pair, because this is how you will get the most, every benefit out of your pairing sessions. So, yes, there are existing tools that we can use to learn programming languages. But I hope today that I've convinced you that pairing is such an incredibly important one that we can and that we should be adding to our toolkit. We've seen how pairing, in the sense of connecting to a native speaker, can be so useful when learning natural languages. So let's take it and let's use it in programming to remove the intimidation of the self-taught learning process and make coding more welcoming for everyone. Thank you.